Welcome to What is Going Om, for new thought from the edge of Om. Each week on Om Times flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandy Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Om. Here is your host, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello. Here's an interesting question to ponder. Has psychiatry lost its mind? According to this week's guest, the answer is indubitably. Jerry Kantor is a faculty member of the Ontario College of Homeopathic Medicine and owner of Vital Force Healthcare LLC, a Boston area homeopathic and acupuncture practice. The first acupuncturist to receive an academic appointment at Harvard Medical School's Department of Anesthesiology, he is the author of several books, including Interpreting Chronic Illness, The Toxic Relationship Cure, Autism Reversal Toolbox, and the one we'll be discussing today, Sane Asylums, the success of homeopathy before psychiatry lost its mind, in which he reveals the astonishing but suppressed history of homeopathic psychiatry. Jerry Kantor, welcome.
Thank you, Sandy. Such a pleasure to be here again.
Sane Asylums reveals that in the late 1800s and early 1900s, homeopathy was regarded with far more respect than it's been given in recent years. I was shocked to discover that there were over 1,000 homeopathic pharmacies, 100 homeopathic hospitals, 22 homeopathic medical schools, and thousands of documented successful outcomes in treating mental illness. So what happened?
Well, that's a big question. Many things happened. Well, the Flexner Report in 1910 was one big problem. When I was growing up, I was always told that the Flexner Report modernized medicine, brought everything into up to standard, and sort of cleaned house. But the truth of the matter is that it was a disaster for homeopathy and for many natural therapies, including Thompsonianism, herbal therapy, Native American medicine. Rockefeller and his minions, and Andrew Carnegie cleared the field for their petrochemical related drugs that were patentable. They could make patents on it. So they cleared the field and denigrated all these other kinds of medicine, created medical schools that made no room for homeopaths. It was an amazing agenda, and bit by bit, homeopathy became displaced. Many other things happened. I mean, the asylums that I wrote about, which were hugely successful and powerful, they failed due to their own success. They wound up becoming overpopulated. With the quality of the staff went down. They became warehouses. But in general, the moral care movement that was dominating mental health care started to erode, and the old abuses came back and started treating the mentally ill as people that just needed to be warehoused or medicated. And homeopaths lost control of their own facilities, and they went through a very tough time after 1910. I think of 1910 quite a bit. That's the year that William James died. He was an amazing psychologist whose idea of thinking about his idea of pragmatism, his idea of process involved in taking into account the process narrative in someone's life, the fact that things change all the time, and his pragmatic orientation. His death was a big deal as far as I'm concerned. It was also the time when eugenics took hold in this country, completely distorting the view of how you looked at not just mentally ill people, but all kinds of ill people. And homeopaths themselves fell victim to the pressures from the pharmaceutical industry. and people like Frank Richardson in New York, I'm sorry, in the Boston area, succumbed and became, um, betrayed their own professions, turning on it for the sake of just getting money to run these research facilities that had a scientific orientation, so-called scientific orientation, which required denigrating homeopathy. It was just ridiculous things happened. Anyway, homeopathy went through a dark period, and it's in some places it never really was killed. I mean, England had a strong history of using homeopathy for quite some time, but in this country, it gradually the message came to be that it's outmoded, that it's old fuddy-duddy medicine, that nobody cares about it, and then people started censoring on their own. A little book came out from Johns Hopkins Press, Homeopathy, medical story of a medical heresy. So Johns Hopkins has been promoting this idea that homeopathy was a heresy, was a sect, very unimportant, and it's taken root. So that in the academic world, the history that I wrote about in Sane Asylums is simply not there. It's absolutely absent, which is a terrible shame because of the dribble down effect of that is that it's not, when something's not taught anywhere, people start to believe that it didn't exist. Censorship is an awful thing.
Yeah. I want to quote something that you had in the book. You said that the moral care movement emerged as a therapeutic approach that emphasized kindness with an intent to restore and build character. It derived from revulsion for existing barbaric treatment, spiritual and moral concern, as well as from the field of psychiatry's gradual concession that mental illness is often curable. When you look at the state of the mental health today, when the statistics are through the roof, why are we not looking at this? I mean, it seems to be such such a kinder treatment and more effective.
Yeah, follow the money, I'm afraid, Sandy. Just follow the money. It's so much easier to medicate people, pretend that, wow, this is great. We've killed institutionalization. People are out in their communities. But of course, we know that in the communities, they're zombies. They're very diminished. And and then there are all these side effects from these famous medicines that have been foisted on this population. We have conditions like tardive dyskinesia, which never existed before. We have 5 kinds of bipolarity. I mean, I look at the DSM volumes, diagnostic statistical manuals of mental health, and I would laugh if it wasn't so sad. One of the conditions is medication-induced anxiety. That's one of the conditions, as if that was everybody was born to have to be on medications. I mean, that industry would be perfectly happy if every single person was an outpatient.
So how are people responding to your book, psychiatrists and colleagues?
There's quite a paradigm division. It's very little in between. Either you get this or you don't. It is being sold because, remarkably, I have a good publisher who stuck their neck out and said, well, there has been a kibosh on homeopathic books. Even places like Elsevier and Team and Springer, which used to publish homeopathic medical texts, they caved to the pressure from the pharmaceutical industry, again, saying, painting this medicine as irrelevant. And they just stopped publishing these books. And in England, the campaign against homeopathy has been strong. In Australia, it's been strong. So these books are not appearing. And so my publisher, Inner Traditions, I think did a fairly brave thing. I argued that, look, this is not another homeopathy book. Just the fact that it has homeopathy in the title will not be a deal killer. And it addresses the reason why homeopathy has been kiboshed. So please bring it out. People who read it are absolutely astonished. They say, I never knew this. And I say, well, that's why it had to be written. You have to fight suppression of information. It's a very bad thing. Anyway, the mental health crisis is so severe now that I think people are starting to look at this, and people who might never have considered it are taking it seriously. But money drives everything. Homeopathic remedies are not patented. So there's not much money to be made apart from actually dealing with people, looking at them, listening to their stories, and selecting a remedy carefully, when it's so much easier to just put them in a certain category. You're a bipolar 1, 2, or 3. You're psychotic. You're schizoid. Take this, take that, and we'll deal with the side effects later. Oh, you've got tardive dyskinesia. You're shaking like crazy and you can't even speak. We'll deal with that. People have the idea that there's no alternative. So my message has been: when you suppress information, there's a consequence. There's something you really wind up paying for that later on. The loss of choice that has come from the suppression of this information has been devastating, and so that's a drum I've been beating for quite some time. And just getting people acquainted with this. This is not trivial. This is not unimportant. The fact that remedies belong to everyone, just like acupuncture points belong to everyone. Nobody has a right to own them. Doesn't mean that they're insignificant. But we have been brainwashed as a society to believe that unless something makes money, it's not genuine or it's worthwhile. I can talk about this forever, but many of us know this on one level, that the perverse incentives in the pharmaceutical industry are horrible. They just drive us in the wrong direction. But people should know there is a choice.
Yeah.
Homeopathy is a little bit slower. It is slower because you have to really get to know someone in their entirety. It's not diagnosis driven. We use these terms as an entry point to get a sense of what's going on. But the differences between people matter much, much more than the commonality. So it's a huge paradigm gap. In the conventional world, the idea of normalcy implies that everybody is the same, and there's any deviation from that abnormality is pathological. In homeopathy, it's kind of the opposite. The differences between matter much, much more than the commonalities. You and I have the same number of organs. We're roughly the same shape. Same kind of physiology, but that's unimportant as far as figuring out what's going on with you. What issue what existential issue in you is setting the table for your chronic illness, whatever you get. So homeopaths, to enter into the spiritual aspect of this conversation, homeopathy is spiritual forensics. If we can figure out what's going on in somebody existentially, which does not mean at the conscious level, subconsciously, what is driving this person that can take them into dangerous waters, that can be addressed with a homeopathic remedy. They have, as we'll talk about in the second half of the show, I think, the existential issues that are embedded within chronic illness conditions. But homeopaths have always known that. It's not even something we talk about. It's just so automatic. Yet that in our practice, but it's a radical idea in conventional medicine.
During the pandemic, I mean, there was quite a lot of material going around about how homeopathy was used in the 1917 pandemic with great statistically, measured success. So I think a lot of more people got exposed to the idea of homeopathy. Are you finding that it is beginning to enjoy a bit of a resurgence?
I am as busy as hell. I am incredibly busy, and it's partly a function of just getting the message out and having these podcast interviews. People who get it, they really do get it. The people who don't, who have people have many mistaken ideas about homeopathy to the extent to which they know the word. Some of them think that it's a synonym for anything gentle. That's not the case. Two other words start with H: herbs and holistic medicine. Well, homeopathy is absolutely holistic, but there are many things that are holistic that are not homeopathic. Remedies can be made from botanicals and herbs, but they can be made from many other things too. So part of the problem has been the mischaracterization and the deliberate misinformation that's been spread about homeopathy. So they don't really know what it is. The idea of using like to cure like, that is something that needs to be taught. That's a law of nature. I didn't invent that. No homeopath invented it. It's just something that's absolutely true. If you get back on the horse that threw you, that's better than never getting back on a horse and finding your terror entrenched. It is really something almost as simple as that. You don't need a double-blind research protocol to prove that getting back on the horse that threw you is a good idea. You have to face your demons. You have to re-encounter the original source of your trauma that has led to your condition in order to get past it. And that is not a quick fix. If you want a quick fix and you're absolutely centered on that, don't go to homeopathy. Just continue doing what you're doing and reap what you're going to sow. If you want to deal with your illness at a deep level, find out, not only get better, but find out why you have become sick. Well, then you have to enter into this arena and engage with what homeopaths like to do, which is investigate your life stories. Interestingly, in the conventional world, they are now starting to talk about how storytelling is really a window into someone. It's beginning to
Yes.
get some traction, but this has been long established in homeopathy for such a long time. And in the asylums that I write about in Sane Asylums, the nurses and the doctors took their time to learn someone's history and prescribe for their situation.
Well, just being listened to can often help someone tremendously without anything else, any other
Yes, that's right.
treatment. Yeah.
And I have found that when I explain the remedy and its deep theme in terms of their life, something profound comes over the client. Yes, as you say, just being heard and resonating with what the remedy is about often initiates the processing of the remedy well before you even take it by mouth.
Yeah. So when did homeopathy start being used in psychiatry? I mean, was that always a thing, or was it something that emerged after people were aware of homeopathy?
Well, from the very beginning, there was no problem with the mind-body distinction. You you had to take the mental and emotional, physical characteristics of someone in taking their case. So it always
So it
touched on
was always
psychiatry.
part of it.
I'll tell you this, Sandy. In China, when the West tried to introduce psychiatry to the traditional Chinese doctors, they couldn't understand it. They just laughed. What are you talking about? We already have that. It's already ingrained in our traditional medicine. And the psychiatrists had the devil of a time trying to convince the Chinese that something like psychiatry was a separate discipline. And I guess, as I say, with the momentum of conventional pharmaceutical medicine, that has won quite a few people over. But the traditional Chinese doctors, so that's ridiculous. We have no need for that. Our acupuncture treatments and our herbal treatments, they absolutely take into account what you're talking about. We don't need a separate discipline for that. So, yeah, if you look at homeopathic textbooks, the mind section on a remedy in Materia Medica is very, very extensive. And we're constantly looking at ways to refine our understanding of the themes of the remedies and categorizing them. And that's something that I've really made a big effort to do in the second book we'll be talking about. So
Mm.
there's many. If you take a word like anxiety or depression, and you show that to a homeopath, my God, we'll have 50 times of kinds of anxiety to talk about. With depression, 50, 60 kinds of depression, and getting really into that term, what exactly that's about. It's as a generic term, it's not that useful. So anyway, to answer your question, psychiatry was not needed as a separate discipline in the early days of homeopathy. But I will say this: Samuel Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, was the very first physician in the world to treat anyone in an asylum using homeopathy. He was the first, and it's a famous case of treating this nobleman in what's now called Germany, Klockenbring, who was completely out of his mind. And Hahnemann did it by observing him very carefully over a period of time, and then prescribing this particular remedy.
Well, you
So
say in your book, I mean, there's some very interesting chapters in there. You say that Abraham Lincoln's wife was treated successfully at a sane asylum.
yeah, now that's going to, if people read that, hope that prompts a lot of discussion. Um, Again, the politics of this are very interesting. His physician was not officially a homeopath. Her physician, rather, in this Illinois sanitarium that Mary Todd Lincoln went to. It was a very famous trial, a spectacular trial for that time. It was written about everywhere. Her son, Robert Lincoln, maintained that she had lost her mind. She was spending prodigiously. She had all kinds of incredible delusions. She thought cities were on fire that were not. She thought that she was being invaded by electricity. I mean, anyway, there were many testimonials about her that she was completely out of her mind. 14 doctors testified. And anyway, she was found incurably insane by this particular trial. And a number of the physicians who were homeopaths said, send her to this guy, Richard Patterson in Illinois. And they kind of winked and winked. I said, he's got a reputation. They didn't say why, but even the homeopath said, see this guy. The guy was not officially a homeopath, but I have lots of information uh, indicating that this is pretty much what he used. And so there are two narratives about Mary Todd Lincoln, and none of them make sense. One was that, well, she was never crazy in the first place. She just needed some rest and relaxation. And the other one was, well, yeah, she was crazy, but the lawyers got her out of there, and that's what accounts of it. What I think actually happened was that she was treated by homeopathy at this sanitarium, and within 3 months she was perfectly fine. She was writing letters to her family. She was petitioning to get herself out of there. She was having convivial conversations with Richard Patterson's family. But uh, back in those days, you saw the statistics on how many homeopathic hospitals there were. Many hospitals practiced homeopathy, had homeopaths on their staff, but didn't call themselves officially homeopathic hospitals. There was no need to do that. The overlap between the two kinds of doctors was very substantial, but the political gap was big. If you called yourself one thing or another, that really relegated you to one crowd. But before patented medicines, physicians had a lot of control over how much of a substance went into their prescriptions. And conventional medicines were constantly thinking they made some huge discoveries by playing with the dilution of the substance, thinking that they made a great discovery, not giving homeopaths any credit, because we've been doing that for centuries. That's how you make a powerful remedy, by diluting it, not by making it stronger. So the overlap was substantial, and this guy Patterson was very, very clever. He covered his tracks, and the homeopaths knew that he had the secret weapon, and that's why they referred Mary Todd Lincoln to him. But this story has never been told. I think it's a 150-year-old journalistic coup.
I liked the segments on Selden Talcott, who you say was arguably the greatest psychiatrist America has not known, and his approach to treating mental illness and other conditions such as chronic drunkenness were, quite ingenious in many cases. I mean, he introduced baseball
Yes.
into psychiatric care
Yeah.
and other natural therapies as well.
Yes. I mean, he was, as a homeopath, he was not that different from a lot of the other well-trained homeopaths who came out. He was a Civil War physician, just a very bright man, a very, very good man. Came out of the Civil War, and he wound up first working at a hospital in New York City for inebriates. And he had, how many people know this? That the hospital for inebriates and broken down people was a homeopathic hospital that he ran, and he was so good at that he was invited to form this to head this other hospital in Middletown, New York, that was just being created, I think, in 1875. And he had many skills as an administrator, as a speaker. He was renowned as a speaker, and just a really fine homeopath who trained with the best homeopaths there were. So he went there, and he became I think the third superintendent of this hospital, and he had the longest tenure there, and he's got it on very solid ground. And the Middletown Asylum for the Insane, as it was called then, became the mother church for these other state-run asylums around the country. All the great homeopathic psychiatrists came through there, did a rotation, and then they would become the heads of other institutions like in Westboro and Cincinnati. And then when they played out their careers there, then they opened the private sanitariums. But Selden Talcott was just, what he did was he noticed, for example, baseball was very big in those days. It still is, of course. And many facilities had baseball fields nearby. And he noticed that when the people were playing baseball, the inmates would play baseball with the staff in the hospital and some of the doctors, and they really enjoyed it. But not only that, the inmates who weren't playing would come out and watch, completely transfixed. And Talcott took that seriously. He said, and he noticed that people were a lot better, felt better, they were more functional, they were more relatable when they were watching baseball. So he created this powerhouse team there. This is how I kind of got interested in this. They had a funny name. They were called the Asylums. Can you imagine? And he poached players from the local teams, and he built this powerhouse team that played major league teams and drew huge crowds. So that was a little source of income to Talcott. And the Middletown Asylums were a famous team. One of their players wound up going to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Anyway, but baseball is in Japan. It's if you want to be professional psychiatrists. You would never take something like this seriously. Oh, that's beneath us. What do you mean baseball for mental health? The Japanese have actually studied that. They have had looked, actually with the controlled study, took a population of people, and those who watched baseball on a regular basis and those who didn't, they found, not surprisingly, a very significant improvement in people who are watching it. It's a very absorbing game and a very existential game, and I kind of go into that in my chapter. It's not a trivial thing, but my hat is off to Selden Talcott for recognizing that and paying attention to it. He wasn't just trying to build a professional profile for himself.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a short break now. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and my guest today is author, publisher, and faculty member of the Ontario College of Homeopathic Medicine, Jerry Kantor. And we're discussing the shocking truths shared in his book, Sane Asylums, The Success of Homeopathy Before Psychiatry Lost Its Mind, which revealed that homeopathy really can and has worked miracles, especially in the area of mental health. We'll be back with more in a few moments. Stay tuned.
Om Times TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times' flagship radio show, What is Going On? And as an author, editor, and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who have walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees, and no BS. Just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Jerry Kantor, you said earlier that if people want a quick fix, homeopathy is not for them. When you think about the number of people who are seeing a therapist, a counsellor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and they're seeing them for years, and they're talking and they're telling their story, they might just as well go to homeopathy. Probably it's quicker.
Well, a lot of what I have to do now is get people off their medications. Used to be that when somebody would come to a homeopath and they weren't on these medications, we would talk about cures, and we could walk that talk. It would not be hard. Nowadays, people seem to be much sicker and they're more dependent on medications. I think I talk differently. I would say we have to get some traction on the case and gradually wean you from these medications just to get back to baseline. So that's a hard thing. people, if they don't have the wherewithal or the will, and they find that they can't deal with the processing of the peeling away of layers that happens with homeopathy, they get defeated. They feel defeated and they go back. So managing the case is really very hard. Probably the most challenging thing. There was something I wanted to mention that I haven't done any of my podcasts around this, and I believe in advanced placement common sense. And there's something in my book that I don't think has been sufficiently emphasized, which is an example of what I would call advanced placement common sense. When I wrote Sane Asylums, it occurred to me that, my gosh, I really have to explain what is madness, what is mental illness. I mean, it's a gigantic question, especially back in the 1800s, early 1900s. It was viewed differently. Anyway, it's constantly changing. The terms that are used go coming in and out of fashion. Terms like, prior to schizophrenia, we had dementia praecox and things like that. But what exactly is it? At the end of my book, I have something called the Compendium of Mental Illness Perspectives, which shows all the different, there's many ways I can think of that mental illness can be looked at, and what the heck it is. It's not a simple thing, and it's not it's not necessarily a medical condition even. There's certainly people who are looking, doing biopsies of the brain. They're not going to find the cause for schizophrenia there. It's not going to happen. And the Chinese knew this anyway by locating many mental problems in the heart, actually, in their theory. But anyway, what I did, I came up with my own definition of mental illness, which is, again, according to my advanced placement common sense standard. Okay, so let me just read this quick section here in the book. Prior to psychosis, an individual behaving unpredictably who seemed unreasonable and overly passionate would have been described as having lost his or her reason. So in place of either psychosis or loss of reason, I have this more common sense notion, compromise of reason. This is what I would say, how I would like to define mental illness, as having your reason compromised. And there are three factors that go into the compromise of the reason. It's kind of a perfect storm of three conditions that has to happen. The first is that has to be some kind of debilitation, either due to either exhaustion or an inborn deficiency. And the inborn deficiency, that would be something congenital in the legacy, in the person's genetic history. Everybody comes into the world with something like that, so it's both important and also kind of unimportant because there's nothing that can be done about that. The second condition involves exaggeration of a pre-existing bias, meaning a narrowing of perspective taken to its extreme. All these, okay, that's what happens when the perspective becomes very narrowed. And the third thing that creates the perfect storm is the effect of a fright or something to stymie reactivity, something that freezes you in your tracks, and then something freezes in the person. And they become stuck. And this is why people with mental health problems defeat their therapists all the time. They're stuck. But anyway, these three things, this is my common sense analysis of what a mental illness condition is. It's very general, but it's also specific in that I believe these three conditions will create the perfect storm. A sense of debilitation due to exhaustion, an exaggeration of an existing bias, and a fright that brings brings everything to a halt and concentrates it all together. So as a matter of fact, one reason I came to this was that when people were brought to the mental hospitals, these greatest homeopathic asylums, the first thing that was done was they would given rest, good nutrition, even well before the homeopathy. They'd given a bath, they'd be cleaned, they'd be spoken to gently by these amazing nurses. I've got a chapter on Clara Barris, who's a genius nurse who wrote this fantastic book on nursing the insane, well, probably the best holistic nursing book ever written. She worked with Selden Talcott in Middletown. But people were given an opportunity to rest and to recuperate, and there was no time frame for how soon they had to be gotten out of there. Why would you do that anyway? People have such different types of traumas. Some people will be there, whether just for a short amount of time. Others will have to be there a number of years. It goes by the individual. In any case, you have to deal with the debilitation that has made them vulnerable to being frightened, and the circumstances of their trauma, which have forced to have narrowed their perspective and made them paranoid. and I even hate using a word like that. But anyway, the term that I prefer to use to schizophrenia or psychosis is compromise of reason, and it involves a perfect storm of these three conditions, coalescing in this particular person. If you believe that, if you buy that, then the asylum approach makes a great deal of sense. And you would, of course, say this idea of medicating someone for that or pretending that it's a medical condition is nonsense.
Yeah. Before we move on to discussing the emotional roots of chronic illness, tell us briefly what you feel should happen in the way that we manage mental health issues.
Whew. Yeah, people should start reading homeopathy books and visiting homeopaths and getting acquainted with these common sense notions and realizing that their fear has been exploited by the medical profession so that they just consume pharmaceuticals blindly. There has to be some way out of it. There's not going to be any instant way out of this, Sandy, any more than taking a drug for your anxiety is really a useful thing to do. It's a big project. You've asked an enormous question because it requires a big shift in perspective. People need to take responsibility for their lives. That's why I'm sort of hung up on the term existential now, because we're going to get into that. This requires responsibility. The existential perspective involves looking at things very squarely, not trying to run away from from trauma and death, these possibilities, looking at things squarely and seeing how am I going to live my life? What's the meaning of my life, and how can I enhance its meaning? And a big part of that, of course, is in chronic illness. Is it's not, homeopathy will not provide an eraser to this. If you want an eraser, do not go to a homeopath. If you want to understand what your disease is, what your illness is, that takes some work and some responsibility, but it's very, very rewarding. My first book, by the way, was Interpreting Chronic Illness, the convergence of traditional Chinese medicine, homeopathy, and biomedicine. And this book is actually a sequel to that. So I think people, if you have to be told that your life is meaningful and it matters that what's going on there, I mean, maybe it's too late. But most people do have some ideas. At some point in their life, they do take stock. They say, what's going on here? Making the connection between their illness, though, and what they're thinking about, that's a big deal. People have to recognize that there's a reason, there's a connection there, and it's worth investigating.
It's always struck me that one of the things that we should be doing is taking the fear out of it, because everybody is afraid. The person who is being labeled psychotic or mad or crazy or, mentally ill, the families, the people around them, the people who deal with them, everybody seems to be carrying some kind of fear that is paralyzing them before they even start.
Yeah.
So
at Middletown Hospital, Clara Barris, who was the nurse in charge of educating the nurses, and she wrote this book in Nursing the Insane. It's interesting. I play her off against Clara Barton, who was the more famous Clara Barr from that time, who was the angel of the battlefield. But I think Clara Barris, who became a psychotherapist, needs her due. Anyway, she taught the nurses to be respectful to the clients. The term that's been discarded has been moral hygiene. So the nurses actually engaged with the clients about their fears and what their concerns were. It wasn't this idea that, oh, this is a condition, I've got to eradicate it, erase it in some way, medicate you away. They heroically engaged with the clients, and to the extent that they could direct them to fruitful activities, letter writing, crafts, arts. They did that. And she did all kinds of stuff. She had giggle classes. She got people in a circle and made them all laugh. There's all kinds of things. But the respect for the clients, which was an elaboration of the moral care idea, was very, very big. But the nurses had a huge responsibility. They weren't just wandering in and out and injecting people with stuff. They were very much engaged in the psychiatry, the psychiatric practice there. But yeah, fear is very, very big. We fear the mentally ill. Sometimes we judge them as terrorists or very dangerous. The mentally ill in Maine are not dangerous to others, but that idea, oh, watch out on the subway, some crazy person's going to push you onto the tracks. That does happen, but it's not the core of what the problem is here at all.
Yeah. Well, in your book, The Emotional Roots of Chronic Illness, I mean, you're looking at homeopathy and how it can be used directly with the subconscious mind.
Yes.
So tell us more about that book.
Sure. So what I think I've done here is reinvent existential psychology from a homeopathic perspective. In existential psychology, which grew out of World War II and the quest for meaning for what was all this about, the Holocaust, all these people dying, what's going on here? That's the expression of that is very, very, very much in the here and now. So it doesn't go into the subconscious. It doesn't go into anything beyond the sense of taking responsibility, trying to find meaning. But what illness teaches us is that these existential issues, themes are buried in the subconscious, and homeopathy can bring them to light. And the body is constantly, when you have a chronic illness, the body is trying to commute its existential plight to you. So if you knew these things automatically, we wouldn't be talking about the subconscious. It wouldn't be something buried. Anyway, so my book identifies 5 core existential questions. And how this is different from what's in my first book is that these questions express what in homeopathy called the 5 classical miasms. In other words, if you flunk these questions, if you cannot resolve the tension in the existential quandary, that sets the stage for tuberculosis or for cancer or for SORA, which is one of the miasms, gonorrhea and syphilis. And I go through that in the book. And those miasms represent the good and the bad that is inherited in people as a result of having an ancestor who's had some of those one of those conditions. Actually, we've all had all of those conditions in our background. But when they emerge powerfully in someone and express themselves in a modern day chronic illness, then the homeopath has to figure out what that miasm is, become engaged with the existential quandary that's there, and find the remedy that helps the person to process it. So I'll just read you to tell you the names of the five quandaries. Unpacking that completely would be impossible to do. That would require you reading the book. But here they are. So the first one is, am I alone or do I act in synchrony with nature and with others? And in Chinese medicine, this pertains to the phase of fire. I'll say a little bit. It pertains to the circulatory system. It pertains to, you'll see the connections if you read the book, to tuberculosis. The second one, which is SORA, this is my presence in the world sustainable? Am I okay in the world? Am I going to survive things? This pertains to metabolism. In Chinese medicine, it's the earth element, and it's in Chinese medicine they also talk about the spleen and the stomach. The third one is, am I oriented in space and time? And this is the psychotic miasm, which relates to gonorrhea. You'd have to read the book if you're not familiar with these things to see how these connections play out. In Chinese medicine, this is the element of metal, and it pertains to sadness and grief and identity, sense of identity. These all are connected dimensionally in my analysis. The fourth one is, can the boundary between life and death be abided? Now, this simply does not come up in existential psychiatry psychology at all, because it has to do with our deep feelings about death, even when we're not aware of them. Somebody who's living, for example, very profligate, have a very profligate life. They just want glamour and sex and immediate gratification. They're not telling you that they have a problem with death, but in fact, what that means is that they're trying to escape that, to deny it, and to be not deal with it. The flip side of that would be somebody who's deeply engaged with their legacy, feeling like they're going to die. They're fine with it, but they're deeply concerned about legacy, what's going to come after them if they're taking care of their survivors. That's the other side of the very same quandary, and there are other remedies that come into play for that. The fifth one, you can have a favorite. This is my favorite. Is, will the insurrection of my birth be fruitful? So, not that everybody worries about this all the time, but at some point, maybe you think, did I make a difference in this life? Everyone's birth is an insurrection against the status quo, Sandy. World's going on perfectly fine. Now you come along. The world will make an impact on you, and you will make an impact on the world. Is that fruitful? This ties into, in Chinese medicine, the element of wood. It has to do with anger, and insurrection is already an angry state. But you can lash out blindly and be very ineffective with anger, or you can convert it into creativity, which is expressed in the Chinese medical system. And this relates to the cancer miasm. And people, in fact, who are prone to cancer, at least as far as this goes, they have the existential problem of having not mounted a successful insurrection in their life. Everyone, in order to become a full adult, must have a successful rebellion against their parents. I don't know how that flies in the conventional world psychologically, but I know that's true, and homeopaths do also. And over accommodating the needs of others may make you a very functional person, very popular person, but when you encounter children who are highly perfectionistic or have anorexia and have had dominating, highly demanding parents, that is this same miasm. They have sacrificed their right to an insurrection for the sake of their parents or for the ecology of the family or something like that. Anyway, there's many variants of this, and I've broken down the remedies as subcategories of these 5 what I call existential questions, which are tied into the 5 classical miasms and into Chinese medicine. And this extends what I did in my first book.
So, if anyone's listening to this and feels that they would like to take it a bit further, I mean, is it common amongst homeopaths to have this knowledge and to be able to approach clients in the way that you're describing in this book?
Well, I mean, I was trained in philosophy, so I'm a little bit more systemic than most people, but most homeopaths who are well trained have a passing acquaintance with this. They pay a great deal of attention to the mental and the emotional symptoms, and they have to use that as the directing force for their prescription. We all have some understanding of the miasms. That varies from practitioner to practitioner, from school to school. So I'm just someone who's finding the organization of that kind of a cosmology. And because of my background in Chinese medicine, I have an advantage in expressing that maybe a little bit more eloquently than others. But homeopaths are all trained to value what's the mental and emotional picture. If you organize someone's symptoms on a pyramid, the very top of the pyramid is always the mental and the emotional symptoms. And if you look at Materia Medica of the remedies, you'll see extensive section on the mind. So we value these peculiar little symptoms that are a window into the psyche. You have to understand first you'll find them quaint and interesting. You may say, well, that leads me to this remedy. But the more you practice, the more you get a sense of why that symptom, is connected there. Why does a woman who needs pulsatilla cry at the drop of a hat? Well, you can just give her the pulsatilla and not pay any attention to it, or you go a little bit deeper and you realize, my God, being forsaken, being abandoned is a very, very big deal in this person's life. It may have started very early on, and in consequence of that, her hormones are very dysregulated. What else I can give you? Other symptoms. I mean, they'll give you some obvious ones. People who are terrified of public speaking, right? Absolutely terrified of public speaking. They probably need a remedy like lycopodium, which is a developmental remedy, and the feeling is very political. They never got over the fact that there are other egos in the world, and they're comparing themselves to other people, and interactions tend to feel like there's a winner and a loser.
Is this something that we can treat ourselves easily with or safely?
You can. I mean, homeopathy is very forgiving. You can get an acute remedy kit, 30 remedies or so, and treat yourself for all kinds of colds and flus and bee stings and even anxiety, with low potency remedies that are not difficult to identify. Helios, your pharmacy in England, has marvelous remedy kits like that. Yeah, they're fine. But at the higher level, it's very difficult for someone to prescribe for themselves. If you study homeopathy, you'll find, I need that remedy. You'll think you need every remedy that you learn about. You need someone else, basically, to even if you're really experienced, to evaluate you. I get it right for myself once in a while, but I mean, I'm really proud of it when I can, because I really have to divide myself. Much better putting myself into someone else's hands. Similarly, with acupuncture, I can needle myself. I mean, there are all kinds of points I can reach. It's not the same as getting someone else's energy when I'm lying on the table, and giving myself over to that person. There's a transfer of energy in the interaction. There's a transfer of energy when you put yourself in the hands of another homeopath as well. So an amorphic field is created, even if the remedy may not be optimal. The fact that you connect with that practitioner and you're feeling heard, something powerful goes on. So there's that. I think it's not that expensive a thing to do. It's something. There should be a lot more homeopaths around. The schools should be supported. They should not be undermined by the pharmaceutical industry's agenda or Johns Hopkins University. We need many more schools. We need a resurgence. We need people demanding more choice in mental health care, which would involve gaining awareness of this fantastic form of medicine and not having it denigrated. Yeah, there's so many things that could be done to improve the mental health of our species.
Well, before we close, we've got a couple of minutes. You are certified in using a homeopathic isopathic approach to autism spectrum disorders. What can you actually treat? Because people talk about behavior is the big one. When you talk about ASD kids, everybody assumes that their behavior is completely not normal.
It's a very deep problem, autism. That would require several other shows. I did write this book, which shows some cases that I've dealt with. The legacy issue there is very profound. It also reflects a lot of the toxicity in our environment and our medications. It does reflect the impact of irresponsible vaccinations. Many things play into that. When I take a case like that, I work with a colleague. There's just so much information to take in, and classical homeopathy, frankly, is insufficient to treat it. That is not a normal condition to treat. So we have to support the child with many other kinds of remedies, and also nutritionally in the course of doing that, treating them. And this homeopathy is very powerful. In fact, this is the autism epidemic, which supposedly came out of nowhere, really gave a tremendous boost to homeopathic practitioners, because nothing else worked. There is nothing. We have behavioral modification, but that doesn't go anywhere near to the origin of what this is. And as I say, the origins are manifold. Many of them have to do with what I would call the syphilitic miasm, or that existential question of can the boundary between life and death be abided? It's a deep question. So remedies from that miasm are always called into play, but we have to use other supportive remedies, and we have to use remedies to reverse the toxic impact of various kinds of medications and environmentally toxic substances, that are like what's used in Roundup, for example. Not everybody's affected by these things. It's not like everyone's equally affected. Some people are affected more than others, and so that's why the individuality matters so much. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it's a hugely deep question. Whoops. You there, Sandy? I think some things are frozen. Hello?
Looks like we've had a technical hitch there, and I disappeared and you disappeared for a short while. But we are actually almost out of time now anyway. We've probably got less than a minute left. Is there anything that you want to add before we close, Jerry?
I'll say something very simple. One of the basic characteristics of life is irritability. I learned this in junior high school, and I thought it was really funny when I learned it. Well, acupuncture and Chinese medicine exploit the innate irritability of living things. Acupuncture is a mini stabbing. Big stabbing is not good, but a mini stabbing is a provocation to the irritability of the organism that directs it to do what it wants to do anyway. Homeopathy is a mini poisoning. Big poisoning is bad, but a tiny poisoning exploits the irritability of the organism, and the healing takes place on the inside. The remedies and the acupuncture are not running over you with a steamroller. They're prompting something, a reaction in you that wants to happen. I will liken homeopathy to being a permission slip to the psyche to let go of the charge of an existential question. This is, again, in the realm of what I call common sense, advanced placement common sense. But the paradigm difference is just so big. And when in the conventional world, we come up with more and more medications, more and more powerful medications, we have to deal with the side effects of that. It's a very bad road to go down. On the opposite side, homeopathics are not even material. They are these permission slips to the psyche, to the psyche. But their specificity is really very, very powerful. It wakes the psyche up. I say, oh my God, that's exactly what I've been terrified of all this time. What I've given up on. Give me another chance. You revisit the scene of the crime under more favorable
there, Jerry. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but give it another chance is good advice to leave on. That's all we have time for, I'm afraid. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for this interview, Sandy.
Sane Asylums, the success of homeopathy before psychiatry lost its mind, and the emotional roots of chronic illness, homeopathy for existential stress, are published by Healing Arts Press, a division of Inner Traditions Bear and Company. And for more information about Jerry's books and other resources that he offers, visit vitalforcehealthcare.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another edition of What Is Going On. And if you want to download this as a podcast, you will find it on the Om Times website, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and all the major podcast platforms. That's it. Thank you very much for joining us today. Till next week. Goodbye from me, and thank you, Jerry Kantor.
Thank you.